How long does it take to distill? Moonshine Life Group by J.B. Wagonmaker. The exact amount of time it takes to distill moonshine depends on a variety of factors, such as the type of equipment being used and the specific method employed by the distiller. Generally, though, the process of distilling moonshine can take anywhere from 4 to 24 hours. The process begins with the preparation of the mash, the combination of fermented grain and water that forms the basis for the liquor. Once the mash is ready, it is transferred to the still. The distiller then applies heat to the still and begins to collect the moonshine. On average, it can take between 4 to 10 hours to distill a full run of moonshine using a basic pot still. However, certain stills, such as electric-powered ones, may be able to distill a full run of moonshine in as little as 3 hours. After the still has been running for a few hours, the distiller can check the proof of the alcohol and decide whether or not to continue the run. If desired, further distillation runs may be carried out to increase the alcohol content or purity of the moonshine. Once the distiller is happy with the proof of the moonshine, they can proceed to cool the liquid and bottle it. This entire process can take between 4 to 24 hours, depending on the distiller's preferences and the equipment being used. A distilling run typically takes between 1 to 3 hours, depending on the size of the still, the type of run being done, and the volume being produced. Smaller stills with a lower capacity will take shorter runs and produce less. However, larger stills with more capacity may be used to produce large volumes of high-proof alcohol in a single run. If a spirit is being created for the first time, additional time may be needed for the distiller to monitor and adjust the distillation process to ensure a quality product is produced. How much moonshine do you get from 5 gallons of mash? It depends on a few factors, such as how much sugar is in the mash, how efficient the mash is, and what type of yeast you are using. Generally speaking, you can expect to get between 3/4 gallon of moonshine from 5 gallons of mash. If you are using a high-quality mash and yeast, you may be able to get up to 1 gallon. To get an even more accurate idea of how much moonshine you will be able to produce, you should research the type of mash and yeast you will be using, as well as consult a still manufacturer to get a better understanding of the process. How much moonshine do you get from 5 gallons of mash? It depends on a few factors, such as how much sugar is in the mash, how efficient the mash is, and what type of yeast you are using. Generally speaking, you can expect to get between 3/4 gallon of moonshine from 5 gallons of mash. If you are using a high-quality mash and yeast, you may be able to get up to 1 gallon. To get an even more accurate idea of how much moonshine you will be able to produce, you should research the type of mash and yeast you will be using, as well as consult a still manufacturer to get a better understanding of the process. Remember, good mash will produce more moonshine and higher proof. How fast should moonshine drip? Moonshine dripping needs to happen at a slow, steady rate in order to produce a quality product. While the exact rate varies depending on the type of still being used and the concentration of alcohol in the moonshine, a good rule of thumb is to aim for an average of 1 drop per second. Adjust the rate to maintain a slow, steady drip, and watch the drops carefully so that you can detect any changes in the rate of flow. If you notice your moonshine dripping too quickly or too slowly, make the necessary adjustments. Additionally, it's important to keep your still clean and regularly monitored, as a buildup of gunk can lead to unpredictable flow rates. How do you know when distillation is complete? Distillation is a process of separating the components or substances from a liquid mixture by selective evaporation and condensation. Distillation may be either batch or continuous. Theoretically, batch distillation is complete when all the components of the liquid have been vaporized and condensed. I stop at 200 or 90 proof. However, in actual practice, a batch distillation is usually considered complete when the liquid remaining in the still pot has reached the boiling point of the least volatile component. This point can be determined by taking a liquid sample from the still pot and analyzing it for composition. When the composition of the sample is constant, distillation is considered complete. How do you know when a moonshine run is finished? When a moonshine run is finished, there are a few ways to tell. The first is the amount of moonshine produced. Most moonshine runs are intended to produce a specific amount of moonshine, and when that quantity is achieved, then the run is over. You may also be able to tell when a run is finished by the condition of the moonshine. Most moonshine runs are intended to produce a specific quality of finished product, and when you have achieved the desired outcome, the run is finished. Finally, when the time and temperature requirements of the particular recipe have been met, the moonshine run is finished. At what proof should I stop distilling? The process of distillation stops when the beverage reaches a certain alcoholic proof or ABV, alcohol by volume. The ABV is determined by the alcohol concentration of the finished beverage. Generally, the alcohol proof of a distilled spirit is twice the ABV, so a spirit with an ABV of 40% would have an alcohol proof of 80. When distilling spirits, it's important to keep in mind that the ABV can actually increase if the distilling process continues past the desired ABV. This is because the boiling point of water and alcohol are different, with alcohol boiling at a lower temperature. Therefore, if the distilling heat continues to increase, the ABV of the finished spirit will also increase. Because of this, it's important to stop distilling at the desired ABV. The best way to do this is to use a hydrometer or a liquor meter, which measure the ABV of the spirit output. When the ABV matches the desired ABV, it's time to stop the distillation process. Can a sip of moonshine get you drunk? Yes, a sip of moonshine can get you drunk depending on the proof. Although moonshine itself is generally considered to be an alcoholic drink, it is usually more potent than other types of alcoholic beverages and can reach an alcohol content of up to 180 proof. Why do you throw away the first bit of moonshine? The first bit of moonshine is often thrown away in the distillation process due to the presence of methanol, a type of alcohol that can be poisonous in high quantities. Because of this, the first bit is discarded to ensure the safety of those who will consume the moonshine. The process of producing moonshine involves boiling the fermented liquid, which heats up the alcohol and causes it to fortify. Since methanol has a lower boiling point than ethanol, the safe drinking alcohol, it will boil off first and can be caught in the first bit of the distillate. This bit is also known as foreshots and needs to be discarded before further distillation. In some cases, moonshiners will use a hydrometer to test the alcohol content in the first bit of distilled liquid and determine if it is safe for consumption or if it needs to be discarded. If there is an increased amount of methanol present, then the fermentation process was not done properly and must be discarded to ensure the safety of the moonshine. What proof should moonshine be? Moonshine should be distilled at a high proof. A higher proof means that there is more ethanol content in your moonshine and it will taste better. Generally speaking, most moonshine should be about 100 proof. It's important to ensure that your moonshine is this healthy proof because it will make your moonshine smooth and will help retain the unique flavors of the grain used. Higher proof moonshine also has less of a risk of spoiling and will last longer. Additionally, when your moonshine is distilled to a higher proof, the alcohol content will mask any impurities in the process that could affect the taste. How difficult is it to make whiskey? Production of whiskey has many steps and requires quality ingredients and careful attention to detail in order to create a smooth, flavorful spirit. First, a grain mash is created using malted barley, rye, wheat, or corn. This mash is then fermented with yeast to create a beer-like wash. The wash is then distilled in a copper pot still to increase its alcohol content. Once distilled, the whiskey is aged in oak barrels for a minimum of 2 years. The aging process adds color and flavor to the whiskey. After aging, the whiskey is bottled and ready to enjoy. While many of the steps in whiskey production are relatively straightforward, creating a high-quality spirit requires knowledge and experience. For example, choosing the right type of grain mash and yeast can be critical in creating a smooth, flavorful whiskey. Distilling the whiskey to the correct proof is also important. Too much alcohol can make the whiskey harsh, while too little alcohol can make it weak and flavorless. Proper barrel aging is also essential to the flavor and quality of the final product. Overall, whiskey production is a complex process that requires attention to detail at every step. However, the results are a smooth, flavorful spirit that is perfect for sipping neat or enjoying in a cocktail. Additionally, a 5-gallon still can also produce up to 5 gallons of distilled water. The amount of alcohol that can be produced also depends on how long the distillation process runs and how many times the run is done. The longer the distillation runs and the more times it is repeated, the higher the alcohol content of the final product. Ultimately, the amount of alcohol a 5-gallon still produces can vary greatly, but it is generally between 3/4 and 1 gallon. How long can a wash sit before distilling? Generally, an alcoholic wash should be allowed to sit for several days after primary fermentation is complete before distilling. The amount of time that you should wait before distilling can depend on several factors, such as the type of wash, the fermentation temperature, and the alcohol content of the wash. Higher alcohol content and warmer fermentation temperatures can allow a wash to reach the desired flavor profile in a shorter amount of time. Generally speaking, lighter beers and wines can require several weeks, while heavier beers or dry wines can require up to a month before distilling. For very high alcohol washes, such as undiluted mashes or pure grain spirits, it is recommended to let them sit for several weeks, too, before distilling. The sit time allows the wash to settle, and any yeast left in the wash will settle to the bottom, allowing less of it to pass into the distillate. Not only will this help to create a purer distillate, but it also allows any off flavors to fade over time. Is it cheaper to buy or make distilled water? It depends on the overall cost for both options. If purchasing distilled water from a store, check for sales and compare the cost per gallon with the cost of the ingredients and equipment needed to make distilled water at home. Also consider the time and effort it takes to make distilled water. Making distilled water takes time and equipment. You'll need access to water, a heat source, and either a distiller or evaporator set up. You will also need something to collect the condensed water, such as a large container. Depending on the materials you're using, the distillation process can take several hours, as opposed to buying just a few gallons of water at once. In the long term, making distilled water at home may be cheaper than buying it. If you're able to invest in the necessary equipment and have access to a clean water source, you can make large amounts of distilled water for a fraction of what it costs to buy it. In the end, it may all come down to whatever is more feasible, cost-effective, and efficient for you. What cannot be removed from distillation? Distillation is an important process used in many industries, such as the food and beverage, pharmaceutical, and chemical industries. It is a method of separating a liquid mixture based on differential boiling points of the components. Although distillation is a useful technique for separating components of a liquid mixture, some substances are not removable through distillation. These substances are said to be non-volatile and cannot be removed from the mixture using this method. Examples of non-volatile substances include flavonoids, tannins, terpenes, phenols, and other large organic molecules. Additionally, some metallic salts, such as copper, mercury, and lead salts, and a variety of acids and bases are generally not removed from the mixture through distillation. Distillation is typically used to separate mixtures of two or more slightly different boiling liquids, but it is also effective in removing impurities from solvents, such as water and ethanol. Can I use boiled water instead of distilled water? Yes, you can use boiled water instead of distilled water. Boiling water will remove most impurities, such as chlorine and other contaminants, as well as bacteria and microorganisms. It is also a cost-effective and easy way to obtain clean water. But using a quality RV filter will do the same thing. Boiling water is generally preferable to tap or filtered water in many applications. For example, it is often the preferred type of water when preparing infant formula, reconstituting freeze-dried foods, or simply replacing distilled water in small quantities. Boiled water is more likely to create a better product with more consistent results, as contaminants and hard minerals are removed. However, it is important to note that boiled water is not the same as distilled water. Unlike distilled water, boiled water will still contain some dissolved minerals. Enjoy Moonshine Life Recipes.